Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Saturday edition of the Art Clinic Online. We are so excited to have Mary Early with us today as our guest speaker. But before that, I'd like to point out that this particular Art Clinic Online is sponsored by our great friends at the Montgomery Art Association. They have been putting on programming. Oh, Lily will have to tell us how long MAA has been in existence and supporting Montgomery County artists in the area. But I remember during many shows with them, and they are just absolute delight to work with. Before we get into our artists today, I'd like to pass the mic to the Vice President of Programming, Lily Kack, of Montgomery Art Association. Good morning, Lily.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Jordan. Yeah, I'm Lily Kack. I'm the President of Program Activities at the Montgomery Art Association. And it's also my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Chitra Sharma, who's the committee chair of member meetings. And this is one of our member meetings that we're sponsoring. So a little bit about MAA. I actually, Jordan, I don't know how old it is. All I know it is one of the oldest and biggest art associations in Maryland and definitely in Montgomery County. We have about 800 members right now, active members. And I'm really amazed at how active and vibrant this association is. I've been a member of MAA for about 10 years, but was too busy I volunteer occasionally, but this is the first time when I've actually decided to dive in and play a much more active role. So I took on this role of a vice president of program activities. There are three vice presidents. I'm one of them since June. That's the first month of our year. And so I'm very new to this as a VP, but have been a member of MAA for a while. It's very, very active. It's a great opportunity to display and sell our members' artwork. Since we have a show almost every month, it is so active. I was just amazed at the number of shows that we have already programmed. We have like one every month. And so I would say in the next 18 months, we will have about 15 shows that are being planned right now. And so, I guess I would call it our signature exhibition is the one that's going to happen on the Labor Day weekend in Kensington. It's called Paint the Town, Labor Day Show in Kensington. And it's a judge show and attracts an average of 3,500 visitors over the holiday weekend. So and we have over 200 artists who submit their pieces. It's really beautiful. I hope you make time to visit it this Labor Day weekend. In addition to the exhibitions, we also have other activities, program activities that I'm actually sort of overseeing. We do have committee chairs for each of these activities, but it includes art-themed field trips about 4 times a year. It also includes plein air painting outings. We have workshops where members can learn new techniques, etc. We have demonstrations. We have art critiques from local experts. And we are now thinking of introducing an open studio because some of our members are saying that they would love to have an opportunity to get together informally with other artists and just learn from each other and just sort of build a network. So we're looking into that, and we will be starting that new activity. So we're always looking for new ideas to respond to what our members are seeking. And so one of the things that we're doing is partnering with the Artist Clinic Online. And we're very, very proud to be a partner with this. And we're planning to support about 3 sessions over the next 1 year or so. And we're really happy and proud to sponsor this particular session with Mary Early. Your art looks, at least on the website, it looks amazing. It's not the kind of art that I do. Mine is watercolor. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you about your art. And so we're very happy to be able to sponsor this session, our first one this year, and looking forward to several more over the coming months. Thank you, Jordan. That's it from me.
Thank you so much, Lily. It's so wonderful to hear about what you guys are up to coming in the future. Before we get to our artists, I would like to first say that we have the Art Clinic Online is having our first exhibition in person. This is a group show that's at the Popcorn Gallery in Glen Echo Park. And the gallery is open from noon to 6 each Saturday and Sunday. So I encourage you to maybe pop over to the Popcorn Gallery here at Glen Echo Park, maybe this weekend, next weekend, or any of the weekends up until the end of September. One of the artists that is premiering in this amazing exhibition is our host today, Mr. Cory Oberndorfer, who has three R's in his name, and not including his first name, just so I know that going forward. But anyway, I love Cory's work, and I would encourage you all to go take a look at his recording for his Art Clinic Online past presentation. You can find those either on our YouTube channel or from my webpage as well. But Cory is probably one of the most thoughtful artist where his artwork seems very simple on face value, but then when you really dive into the complexity of it, you get a new appreciation to it. And I think part of my love of your work is just like the storytelling that you have in that. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Cory Oberndorfer, our host for today.
Thank you, Jordan. So flattering. Uh, so I'm excited to host Mary Early, and it feels weird because she has been around the DC art scene way longer than me because she's one of the few DC natives that I know, and I believe that's multi-generational DC natives. Um, so she's been around the art scene for a long time. The first time I ever knew about her work was one of my first shows in the DC area, McLean Project for the Arts. We both had work in a an exhibition themed about rhythm and repetition. She had one of her sculptures of beeswax sticks somehow precariously structured. She'll talk a lot more about it, but I've never quite seen something like that before. And so it definitely stuck in my memory all these years. And then I got to know her a little bit more as she's always around. And I saw her more often back when 14th and P was kind of the arts hub for a little while, and she was working at Hemp Hill Artworks, and they were located there. And so that's when I first got to know her work. And then later on, I discovered that she also did drawings, and I fell in love with her drawings in addition to her sculptures and installations. And I definitely encourage you to check out more of that work on her website. Or, if you can ever talk her into a studio visit at the monastery, uh, which, I've never been to a studio at a monastery before. So that was an interesting experience. But I could talk forever about Mary's long CV, but you can check it out yourself. In addition to being an amazing artist, she does a lot on the administrative side as she's on a panel or a board at Hamiltonian and Washington Sculptors Group. She's the director at Hemp Hill Artwork. And so if you don't know someone in the DC art scene, Mary knows them for you. So she's a really good resource in that regard. So I'm really excited to have her here today, and I want to introduce Mary Early.
Well, thank you, Corey. I appreciate your kind and I'll also say generous introduction. You make my credentials sound like a big deal, and it's a lot of stuff that I do that all kind of adds up, and each thing helps the other. I was after you mentioned it, I was thinking about the sculpture that was in the show we were in together at McLean. And it was literally the first piece I ever made like that. And it was a test piece. So it was a test piece and then it worked, but it didn't work. So I made it a different way the next time. And I no longer have that piece. And it's not in the slides we'll look at today. So we can talk about it like later, or maybe at the end of the talk, I'll pull up an older image.
I was
Um,
there at the beginning. This is
I
exciting.
know that was the beginning. So I'll talk, and then I'll talk for a minute, and then I'll share images, because I think if we start looking at images, I won't be able to say a couple important things like thank you, Cory, for inviting me. I love the idea of this project, and to me, it's like a conversation, the same way that an exquisite corpse drawing is a conversation between artists, because the design of one person starts and talks, and then they invite somebody, and that person invites somebody else. It establishes that wonderful network between people, that helps us learn something new because we meet a friend of a friend or a colleague of a colleague or something like that. So, um, congratulations to Jordan for pioneering such a strong program and creating such a great archive of artists speaking about their work and to each other, because it's much needed. And archival sources for artist materials are out there, but so many artists don't know or have access to the tools to find them. And it's really because they just don't know about it. So organizations like Montgomery Art Association, with its long history, did the math, that's 70 years. So you probably have four generations of members within that 70-year period, which is amazing. It is organizations like MAA and Washington Sculptors Group and the Washington Project for Art and Black Artists of DC, and like studio buildings where artists work for years or decades on end. It's up to those organizations to help empower artists to tell their own story and commit it to record, which goes a long way to establishing the value of artists in society. And I think that's something we fight every day, especially now. And we could like steer the conversation towards like funding and politics and stuff like that. But that's, that's forever. It's always going to be an issue, and today's issues are unique and different and challenging. But that is not different for any artist who has made a living as an artist or tried to in the last 200 or 300 years. So, um, it's always interesting to talk to other artists because they have questions and comments about my work that had not occurred to me yet. I am often described as a sculptor, and I make sculpture, and I used to make sculpture. I don't really make sculpture anymore. I make installations now. I probably haven't made like solid object for 5 or 6 or 7 years, maybe longer. This is probably a good time to show the first photo. So, I have put together a group of images from a little bit like almost the last decade, but not quite. My early work in like say the early 2000s was first solid works in concrete that had a wax surface, and then I started working with beeswax, and by around 2001 or 2 or 3, I was really shifting from working in concrete with a wax coating that was clear or transparent paraffin wax. I was shifting over to beeswax for a lot of reasons. One, because I learned, pretty quickly what the chemical properties of paraffin wax were, and how, they're a petroleum product. And as I started comparing the working qualities of wax, paraffin versus beeswax, it seemed pretty smart to use beeswax if I could, because it was not as harmful to the environment as paraffin wax is. So I had this interesting transition over a couple of years period. And by maybe 2005, when Cory and I were in that show together, 2005, um, I was making sculptures out of wood. And then I was finishing the surface with stuff like sort of fabric mesh material, and then coating it with beeswax. And I made all these very intricate lattice-like structures that would like sort of fit together like pickup sticks, or like sort of like that. And they were really interesting to make and very delicate, and the kind of sculpture that if I wasn't there to install it, nobody could install it. And I loved that because it was all my balancing, my precision, my choices, my mistakes, and this very temporary experience. And that was every phase of my work has been a learning experience, of course, and that's almost obvious, but each phase has always led to something different that incorporates everything I've learned up until that point. So after a couple years of making these wonderfully complex, challenging to move, challenging to store sculptures, I started to get frustrated about a really simple thing, storage. And I was like, wow, now I have this great collection of probably five, six, seven of these very complex wood sculptures where there might be 40 pieces and they have to be installed and nobody can breathe on it. The gallery space has to be totally empty all the time. Nobody can push a baby stroller into it because it'll collapse. And I was like, I kind of need to do something else. And so just casually, I had started making these little strips of wax. And what we're looking at on the screen is about 29 inches long. And imagine it's like the dimension of a carpenter's pencil, like a half an inch by about a quarter inch or so. And it's a creased long component that's made by pouring wax into a wax paper or paraffin paper, not paraffin, sorry, like parchment paper lined aluminum tray. And I started making these solid beeswax cast elements so that I could add them up together and create a visual array to create something much larger, to create almost an illusion of filling a space. And it also allowed me to stop with the storage in this funny way. And this is the type of installation that I later made with components similar to that one. This is a work made in 2017 in the museum space at American University, where there is a curved, sort of a curved gallery space that goes up 2 stories. And if you were to walk through it, you'd cycle through about maybe 90 degrees of the curve before you come out the other end in a smaller space. So it was this interesting way to travel through the space. And I had a project to plan this exhibition over the course of 2 or 3 years, which was a luxury because it allowed me, I mean, it's a luxury we should all have. It allowed me to study the space, think about the space, come up with an idea, and then come up with a different one. And then every time I came up with an idea, I'd be like, yeah, and then I could do this again, and I could do that again, and I could do something else. So it was a great working process because I cycled through all these ideas on paper with sketches and on the floor plan. And then when I went to actually do the installation, I altered it slightly. And I was comfortable with that because I had gone all these other permutations in my mind, knowing that when I was actually there, I would work it out somehow. Um, and one of the firm beliefs I have about my work is that I have to be adaptable to the place that the work is shown in. And I also need to get to that adaptability by finding the space that's the right space for me. And my challenge is to find spaces where the architecture has some kind of um, gravity to it. And I won't define gravity. It's just like a feeling. Like sometimes I walk into a space and I feel good. There's something great about the proportions of the space. And I think, oh, I would love to see beeswax lines all over the floor in this space. And if it's an art museum or an art gallery, you can kind of like, oh, do they do shows here? Who do you talk to? Maybe you know somebody. Maybe one day there will be an open call for entries and you'll submit something and it'll be accepted. you never know. The only way to find out is to start thinking about it and then following the opportunities and figuring out how it works and all those kinds of things. So many exhibitions that I've been in the Washington, D.C. area have been juried exhibitions. And the earliest exhibitions I was in, like 1 or 2 years out of college, were juried exhibitions through the Washington Project for the Arts, and McLean Project for the Arts, and later Washington Sculptors Group. And I think I can definitely say that for the early stage of my career as an artist, that was how I met other artists. And that's how I was introduced to curators. I didn't even really know at that young age what curators did or that that was a job. It didn't make sense to me because I never studied art history, and I never watched someone curate a museum show. Some of you might know the word curate is not even really, curator is not even a term defined in the dictionary. So there's this job title of curator that's so important in the art world. And it's funny, sometimes people don't even know that it exists. So one of the benefits of being in juried shows in nonprofit art spaces is that it might be juried by a professional curator, somebody who has an art history degree, somebody who's studied art, somebody who's worked in the art world for a long time and knows other artists, and is able to make connections between your work and the work of your peers, your work and your predecessors, and draw the connections from history to present that can help best tell the story of your work and present your work to the best case. So all that to say, the spaces for art, the places where we present our artwork, are just as important as the artwork themselves. And I've taken this idea that I'm a sculptor, but I'm also an installation artist, to a point where I feel like I have to say that to people. If I meet somebody new and they say, "Oh, Mary's an artist, what do you do?" And they're just expecting me to say, "Oh, I'm a painter. Like I make like little square things that hang on the wall." It's so easy. And then I say, "I'm a sculptor, but," and I always find myself saying, "I'm a sculptor, but," and I have to say but because I don't make a thing that you can hold in your hand. I make this stuff that goes in a space and fills the space, and then it goes away. Like it goes away into a box where it gets condensed down into a little package and put away to be reused again later. This is another variation. This is a work that hangs on the wall, and the beeswax castings are made a little bit different, and they have a braided cotton strand through them. This was the first time I made a piece like that, and each little section, I think it depends on how big everyone's screen is. I don't know if you can see these little details between each section where there's like a little shadow. That is a connection where I literally tie a little knot between each 18-inch section. And that gives me something that is a long chain almost, which is kind of drapes until it's laid flat. And I hang those up on the wall. So for this piece, it spans a 2-story wall that's about maybe 24 or 22 feet high, and you can view it from below, or if you're on the second level you look out and look down on it, so it's a really interesting view. Again, a work that will only exist in that particular environment. It will never feel the same or look the same, because it will be a different piece in another environment. I take great pleasure in the process of the work to actually do an installation at a site. So when I have the opportunity to assemble a piece for a show where the work has 300 pieces or 1,200 pieces or some, odd number that adds up to the right math for the artwork, I work out how long I think it will take. And then I plan and I think, oh, it will take 2 days. Why don't I plan, for 3 just in case? And then it always depends on how much housekeeping there is to do around the installation. Maybe it's less, maybe it's more, who knows? But each work is an experiment, but also each work is informed by the last time. The very first really complex hanging installation piece I made was around the same time as this, maybe a few months earlier. And it was designed for a gallery space where I wouldn't be able to visit until I was there for the show because it was in a town in Germany. So I had all the floor plans for the space, and um, they were in metric units. And I thought I knew how big the space was because I did the metric to inches conversions, but it turns out that I didn't get it right. And there was also an extra space that I hadn't understood on the plan. And there was actually a whole, almost as much more gallery space as I thought. So I had been working for months and months and months, and I figured out how to pack an entire show into 3 suitcases to fly to, I think, Frankfurt, and then take a train and a bus and all that kind of stuff to get here. And I get there, and the hosts take me to the gallery space to look, and I walk in to look around, and it looks kind of familiar, but then they show me this other space, and they're like, and this is your space too. So I had like 7 days, and I had my 3 suitcases full of beeswax, and I just figured it out. The work on the right here is a oil stick drawing on wood panel. And because I kind of knew there were like some different spaces, and I knew that I needed to bring something with me just to have a object, drawing something, some relic. So I had made all these studies this size, like I don't know, 14 by 12 inches, and each one was a different concept. And these are lines to loosely illustrate a cubic or three-dimensional space. So I had not planned for the image of the hanging lines that you see to relate so closely to this drawing. But this drawing and the eventual result of the work make sense together and fit together. And I had about 6 of these different variations, drawings on wood panel in different configurations. And I used those as a resource to figure out how I would fill the additional gallery spaces. And so I had like a chevron design that was a variation on this one. So I did a small version in a long corridor. There was a kind of quirky column space, so I made a work for the column. And this was all a luxury because I had a whole week to kind of fool around and to like be there by myself and not talk to anybody because I didn't speak German, and maybe they didn't speak English. So there was no interruptions. It was just me. And I the whole project turned out to be so rewarding for me because it was this connection between place, my initial ideas about scale, proportion, how to implement my beeswax units, and the luxury of spending time in the exhibition space. So I've been very lucky to have experiences like that, and I look for them. They're not often. One of the really informative things for my career has been working in a setting of an artist residency where maybe it's for 2 weeks, maybe it's for 3 weeks, maybe it's shorter, but you go somewhere and you're with a group of artists you've never met before, and you're all there to work. And maybe there's some entertainment or a picnic or an outing or something, but there aren't the regular distractions of your everyday stuff, your house, your pets, the car, watering plants. And I've had the greatest discoveries in my work during periods like that. So I'm a big advocate of not, needing to get away, but needing to make a new place for yourself and realize that putting your head and hands in an unfamiliar place will let you slow down in a way that you can process your thoughts a little bit differently. I work uh, I work a full-time job in addition to the work I do as an artist. And even though it's in the art world, deeply immersed in the art world, it does not help me make drawings or paintings or pour beeswax lines in my studio. It takes a lot of mental energy. So I can't turn that off at 6 p.m. and then be hyper productive in the studio simultaneously. It can take a lot of energy to like wind down from certain experiences. So making time to go away and work in a new setting is great. And for me, it has always resulted in a shift in a really positive way in my work. I so I have images that are roughly chronological, but I might pop back and forth a little bit. And each one of these projects has led to the next. And every time I do one schematic drawing for a specific space, I do two or three versions until I get to what I think I'm going to do. And then there's what I think I'm going to do. And then there's what I actually do. So all along the way, I accumulate sketches and ideas. And I keep all of them because another space might come along and that one might work there. So this work was made in 2018 in a large rectangular, so very long gallery space with high ceilings and two entrances. This is at the Sun Valley Museum of Arts in Sun Valley, Idaho. And it was part of an invitational show titled Bees. And it was about a dozen artists whose work all dealt with some concept related to bees, beekeeping, um, uh, honey processing, the environment, illustrations of insect and plant life, just almost anything you can imagine. So um, I got to work with them to come up with a plan for this space, and I made two like crisscrossing lines with using the ceiling to suspend a hanging system that they would hang from. And at this point, it was the most ambitious and like largest dimension piece like this I had made. So because they had some resources in terms of funding and also installation assistance, I could do something that I might not be able to do in a smaller space close to home because just because of practical reasons. So I made a bunch of different variation studies for a piece that would crisscross this room and partition it off in a way that people could travel around like they were in a maze almost. And this was the resulting piece. Here's a detail view. And what's interesting is that there's this moire pattern that develops from different angles. And with that work, I discovered that and I started to think more in my plans about how I could incorporate the moire pattern into works. And again, chronologically, the next slide in my presentation is 2020. And I feel like we have to take a small pause for 2020 because it was such a year. And I started the year off with a project with Freight Gallery, which is an artist-run space in Northeast DC in a historic warehouse building that dates, I think, to the 19th century. The building has a working freight elevator that is, I think, original to the building, which used to be a postal sort facility. And the person who created this project and manages every aspect of it is an artist named Julia Bloom, who has a studio in the building. She, about once every 2 months or so, invites an artist to do a project in the Freight Gallery during a 2-hour window, which is the time period that you can reserve the freight elevator for. So when she does a show, your show is there for the 2-hour exhibition opening reception, and then you take it and remove it. And that is in keeping with the spirit of reserving space and respecting the need of other people in the building to use the freight elevator every day. And it also reflects the artist's desire to do something that is within the limitations of what's available, but also challenging ideas about what makes an exhibition or what makes a single artwork. So when she brought it up to me, I was like, man, I'm thrilled. That's my stuff. Like, I'd love a 2 hour show. That sounds like the best show ever. And I was on board before she could even finish describing the project to me. So I filled up the freight elevator with all these little bitty beeswax lines. And then from a distance, with the hallway dark, it had this kind of glow. And for me, I'm not doing a whole lot to a space. I'm just making this, I'm doing, placing this work, and then it has this colorful glow, and then the color makes you pay attention to the space. And then after that, you're kind of on your own. You do what you want. Um, we had so much fun with it, and there was all this weird stuff in the building. And so to break the rule of Freight Gallery, we did a second version like 2 weeks later. And I used a piece of utilitarian furniture that was just in the building, and it was a welded steel rack on wheels. And so we pushed it partway into the freight elevator so that it felt like sort of a conveyor belt, and just a way to extend the experience of space a little bit. So it was experimental, and for me, interesting to do something that was such a snapshot in time. This was probably the end of January 2020, maybe February. And then in spring 2020, when everything stopped in our world, and we all went home, I started to focus on drawing on works on paper. And it wasn't because I couldn't work in my studio. It seemed like such a ordeal to figure out how to work at home and, like, sit at a computer at home all day and then think about my artwork and stuff. So I started doing drawings at home on a smaller scale. And over the year, like 2020 to 2021, every exhibition that I had been planning for however long, some a year planning, things like that, everything got canceled. So there was this couple of years in 2020 and 2021 where I was producing beeswax lines for future use, but not with anything on the schedule. Like, my shows had been canceled, or we talked every month and they said, yeah, not yet. Yeah, not yet. Yeah, not yet. And for one project, that took a whole 3 year period before it actually happened. And so interestingly, during that time, I kind of refined my method of drawing a little bit. And Cory started out by talking about the drawings I make. For a long time, I made kind of like stick figure drawings, like only for me, only useful for me. And if there were measurements or dimensions or something, it was because it was like a note for something I was gonna work out. And I started this type of work on paper in a much more way to consciously make a permanent object, thinking that the drawing, which is like a sort of hint at a potential installation or structure, is going to be permanent in a way that these beeswax installations can't be. So to make this work, the yellow pigment is a oil stick. And sometimes I use like a Sennelier artist's oil crayon, or a wax crayon, or like one of those Sharpie wax markers that you like. Sometimes they're called a cattle marker, but they're oily. So when the drawing dries on a white sheet of paper, it kind of dries, cures, hardens. And then I take the paper and I soak it, and then I flood it with a ink wash. So like sumi ink that's sort of thinned halfway with water. And I make it semi-transparent, and then the drawing will lay flat and all that water will begin to evaporate. And the water and ink mixture resists the oily, waxy element of the yellow drawing. And all these interesting patterns start to occur, both with the activity of the water on the paper, and then also the resistance in some way to the yellow, oily or waxy material. So I kind of hit on this interesting way of committing an idea to a fixed place. And it just opened up a different type of activity to me. So my studio habit is, it depends on how much time I have. If I have 2 or 3 hours, I'll do kind of one set of things. If I have all day, I'll do something else. If I only have an hour or so, I will draw grid lines on paper, and I use sort of fine mechanical pencils and a whole bunch of different types of measuring devices. And like this is a sheet of paper 55 inches wide, and I started by making vertical lines, and then I do little cross hatches. And in my mind, each of those little sections mimics the section of the beeswax line that I'm going to create. So I think about it in these number terms of that, like one unit, another unit, another unit. And so I'm just looking for a kind of balance or proportion. And then I like the contrast between the grid, which is not rigid because it's all hand drawn, and the yellow lines are irregular in some ways, and then the very fluid, what ends up being the sumi wash element of the work. Um, this is another similar work, and then that is leading up to another hanging installation work that was done soon after. And this looks, I think it looks small here, but it's 24 feet long. And it's made up of a rectangle that runs down the length of the gallery space. And it's about 4 feet wide and 24 feet long, and hangs from a rectangular ceiling track. And then you can walk around it, but you can't walk in it. And there's plenty of space. And it's another, I mentioned earlier the idea of a moire pattern. I love the feeling of physically moving around something and observing a shift in light or pattern based on your physical activity. So my work really relies on the viewer to see it. It does not translate in reproduction on a printed page other than in an illustrative way. So I am very, very entrenched in the idea that you need to see art and experience it in person in order to have a full experience. Another element in my work I haven't mentioned is the scent. The material I'm using is typically beeswax blocks, maybe a pound, maybe a 50-pound chunk, that come from beekeepers, sometimes in the DC area, but rarely, more often from other parts of the country where beekeeping and honey processing has where there's an industry for it, or like there's a lot of beekeepers in the southeastern US, like in Georgia. There's a lot in the Midwest. The beeswax for this particular project came from some folks in South Dakota. So I've been like learning about beeswax processing and honey production and beekeeping for a long time now, and it's a really fascinating element to my work that is like not really fully explored. And I've often been asked about, why do you use wax? Why beeswax? And there's so many reasons. To try to say why in one or two sentences, I find impossible. It is a visually resonant material. The color has such power because of the brightness and lightness of it. Couple that with the scent of it, and then you have that next phase of attraction, memory, the reasoning behind how we respond to scent is interesting to me. And also the way that beeswax is activated by changes in temperature or humidity. When I make these installation components, I am melting the wax to a liquid form, pouring it, and then it goes through the cooling or curing process, and it changes from liquid to solid in a fascinating way. That part of the process is all for me. That's for my enjoyment. I love being in the studio and pouring wax. I could do that forever, and be totally content. It's meditative. And so are other things. The knot tying to make these pieces into chains so that they can hang is also meditative. Where am I going with that? That's a valuable thing to me. And I know that most artists can't function if they're not making art. So it's interesting to think about what happens when you stop making art or take a break or can't work because some crazy reason or something like that. The answer is always go back to the studio, even if something's not working. Just being there is fine. Being in the studio and having your mind in that space has value beyond words, I think, for me and for probably everybody here. A couple more images to show, and then I think depending on timing, maybe we talk a little bit or ask questions. I'll quickly show you a couple recent projects related to this one. This is similar scale, but it's like a single curtain. And this is in an almost residentially scaled space. That's a small gallery space on our street in DuPont Circle, which is historically in the 70s and 80s and 90s where a lot of DC galleries were. Now there are a handful, like studio galleries there, like one or two design showrooms, and they're right around from the Phillips collection, which makes it a attractive neighborhood. So this piece was designed for the window and designed so that it could capture views from people passing by at night. So at night, it kind of glowed in the window, which was a amazing aspect of the work. These are two different drawings that are made in a different manner. It's a water-based wax crayon where when you apply any liquid, it just sort of dissolves. And I manipulate the paper to make it run down like a waterfall. And this is just a way of recording my ideas about a long columnar type of piece. Last year, I worked with another artist-run project space in the DC area called WAS Gallery. And WAS Gallery has had other physical locations, but right now operates in a converted garage. This is a garage in a Northwest DC neighborhood not too far from Tenleytown. And surprisingly, it has white finished drywall and is suitable for an exhibition. So it's a tiny exhibition space, and the person who programs it is doing this to provide a different type of space to artists and viewers and people to have an experience outside of the traditional gallery or museum model. This work is more three-dimensional than a lot of the hanging pieces. It fills a space that's like a depth of, like you could kind of walk through it or you walk around it and it feels like sort of a cloud. And it was another circumstance where I designed one thing on paper and then I got there to do it and I was like, oh, I got to do something different. I had planned to make the lines hit the floor and then sort of curve like a carpet unrolling. And the garage door opens so you can go in, and there's like a lot of leaves, there's bugs, there's like, and it's going to be hard to do that. People will accidentally walk on the stuff. So I made it into more of a filling the space from top to bottom and do something a little different. And this was a project, it was up for about maybe 2.5 months and viewable by appointment. So to visit, you would email a request for a time and then schedule and then go meet. And if it was at the end of the day, you could watch it get dark and sit around in the garage. So it was a great experience and a really different way of visiting with people and talking to them about either this or the garage or galleries or their studio work. But I found it very engaging and a really different way for artists to see each other than when they accidentally meet up at a museum or gallery opening. And then the most recent work I have made is this work. This is on view now at the Delaware Contemporary Center for the Arts in Wilmington, Delaware. They have I think, annual summer exhibition program called Radius that is typically a regional survey. They have a lot of different gallery spaces, I think 7 total. So each of the 7 spaces has its own curated selection, almost like 7 simultaneous shows. And there are a couple other DC artists in the show I'm in, which is called Radius Landform. This work is about 12 feet high on the wall, which is 14 feet. And I have a couple of photos to show you the process. I know I've talked a little bit about the process, but definitely not enough to really explain what I'm doing. That's always hard, but here we go. So this is the space as I began. On our left is nothing. On the right is about 12 or 16 lengths of beeswax lines that have been tied together on the table. I think this probably took to tie all those, probably took maybe 4 or 5 hours. And then these are all of the beeswax lines that are going to be hung up on the wall. And with help from 1 or 2 other people, we went up and down on the lift um, maybe 29 times, one for each segment, to hang them up and place them. And this is a close-up view so that you can see how each section is tied together with one knot and then another knot. And these are little, like a square knot, or if you think about what a pretzel knot looks like. And that's the most recent work. I have a kind of study in mind for another version of this that might be a little narrower or smaller. And I continue to vary the idea. So next time I have either an invitation to exhibit somewhere, I have plenty to choose from. I'm not worried about that. But each project, each architectural space opens up something new. I don't feel like I'm going to run out of ways to do this, even though I might one day say, oh, I'm not going to use beeswax anymore. Maybe there's this other material I want to try. But for now, I guess, as I said earlier, going on almost 20, maybe 25 years, it's been committed to this one material. I'm by no means an expert. None of us are, but I love the material, and I love learning from other people about their experiences and their responses. I love meeting beekeepers, farmers, gardeners. Anywhere I go, I want to meet the beekeeper. There's a beekeeping program where my studio is. My studio is in DC, in Northeast, on the grounds of the Franciscan monastery. And there are about 5 artists in the building, which is an industrial scale building that also houses their heating furnace for the entire complex and grounds. So it's an industrial space with great light and wonderful, quiet atmosphere for concentration. They have an urban farm there, and along with that, a food program, big volunteer program, and a beekeeping program. So there are a couple opportunities throughout the year to do a workshop where you do honey harvest, or maybe a candle making workshop. And for people who are interested in beekeeping or who have experienced beekeeping, they have a group of volunteers who take care of the hives. So I don't know, that seems like a good place to stop. I do have more images, but I think in the interest of time, maybe we.
This is fabulous, Mary.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you fold these? They're wonderful, and what they do for spaces is amazing, even though it's just little sticks. I mean, I'm not minimizing it, but it's amazing to see it. And and then the question is, how do you, if at all, sell any of these?
Those are 2 great questions. So I'll answer the first one. I pour the wax into mold forms that I've custom fabricated, and I use parchment paper, which is a non-stick baking paper, and it's cut to length that matches the length of what I'm going to pour. So I have the aluminum trays that I use. Imagine like a baking sheet that has say you got a muffin tin and you put muffin cups in it and then you put the batter in. So that muffin cup is the parchment and the batter is the cupcake. My corrugated aluminum forms are the mold, and then a long, almost an 18-inch long folded paper that's a sticky, non-stick release. And I fold the ends up. Have you ever made like a cup for water out of paper and you can fold, do a fold and then make a diagonal fold? And then that once flat piece of paper actually is a three-dimensional volume. So basically fold accordions of paper and then fold up the edges to make a little divot, and then they're three-dimensional. And so for every single one of, I pour six at a time. So one sheet of, here's for the bakers and the crab, one sheet width of organic certified baking paper will fold up to make six poured lines. So my aluminum trays match that. Back in like 2014, I think I came up with this idea, and then it took me a while to like realize I was going to make a lot of them. And I had made all this weird stuff in my studio to support the accordions. And then finally I got a chance to work with a metal fabricator, and I was like, oh, I could make this a lot more uniform. So now I'm like, I have a factory. So I should put photos of this stuff in here, but I never think of it. If you look at my Instagram page, go way, 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 way back, you might see photos in the studio where you see like a wax is melting.
And do you put a string through the whole?
Only for the components where I'm going to hang something on the wall. So these, sorry, wrong way. These are wax only. And so if you bend it, it breaks in half into two pieces, and I can melt them down. Sometimes I melt things down and reuse them. Actually, very often. So these works have string in them, and that's because they're going to be tied together and hung. And there's a loop at the very top that ties or hooks onto like a nail or an anchor or something.
And you said you do a square knot.
Yeah.
Like a surgical square knot.
I don't know if it's surgical, but
yeah. Right. Oh, wonderful. And for the curving, did you do were they connected, or was it?
No, they were just laid on the floor, and they like intersected a little. Each one was staggered to the one side. So as we traveled the curve, there was each one sort of,
yeah. So the straight pieces form the curve.
Yeah.
It's like a tangent. Thank you. That's amazing.
And I'm not a mathematician. I'm visual about how the geometry of spaces fits together, but by no means am I doing math. I'm plotting, but I'm not calculating. And sometimes with a complicated space like that curve, like I will reach out to a friend who's really good at math and have them either run the numbers or help me calculate volume or something like that, just for fun, just to make sure what I'm envisioning is realistic. Like if I decide to do something and I say, okay, I'm going to do that installation and it's going to work with 6,400 beeswax lines. If I do the math wrong and I'm off by like 2,000, that could be a problem. So the best thing is just make more beeswax lines. Always have enough, never run out. So every once in a while, I will inventory all my boxes. They just stack up. So I have boxes where each box has 250 lines in it, and if they haven't been used yet, they're pristine. If they've been put out in a floor installation, maybe they're clean, maybe they're dirty. If they're good, they get packed up again. If they're damaged or crumbly or anything, I will set it aside and then melt the wax down later. So everything I make in this way can be melted and reused in the same continuing work. So about once every 6 or 8 months, I get like 40 or 50 pounds of beeswax. It's not going anywhere. Like I will never throw away a piece of beeswax. I will always melt it down into the next thing. So So that's
it's a perfect upcycling system. You don't generate any trash almost.
Right. There's a lot of waste in the art world. There's a lot of waste in everything, but particularly in the art world, there's a lot of packaging waste. There's a lot of transit expense, fuel expense for moving artwork long distances or even short distance. And so we should think about it. You should think about, like, should I drive to get that thing from somewhere, or should I make 2 trips in one day some other time? We should all think about it.
I have a question that's not about how your work is physically made. It's more about meaning, message. Real quick about me. One thing, a message that I have is a message of being stuck and not stuck. And I use I use dance movement at times and then the visual art is connected. When I because I'm me, when I see a lot of your work, it looks like ideal for that message of, like, if not that it looks like a prison, but it looks like a wall that you can go through. And as far as you're talking about space, have you so so what is your message regarding space? You've alluded, and have you ever thought about the those polar opposites of being stuck and not stuck, as far as your work can reflect that?
I don't think I addressed the idea of being stuck or not stuck, but my overriding philosophy on space is the more the better. There's a balance to certain types of spaces. And like the image that's up on the screen right now, this is a early, probably 1910, 1920s townhouse in a traditional style. And it has high ceilings in a way that no downtown condo built in 2022 or 2025 for the apartment rental market will ever have. It has space and breathing room and all these conditions. And most of those conditions come from practical matters, like the building needed to breathe to allow for air circulation. I am attracted to spaces that are healthy spaces, that are proportional spaces, spaces that allow you to look and see and experience light. And I think there's like a kind of natural rhythm between both architecture and design and the practicality of home building and housing, and they have to meet somewhere to work. There's just a balance. Like, the more we pay attention to it, the more we understand it. I don't think I'm answering your question at all. But but I pine for the architecture of the early 20th century. I love modern architecture. I don't live in any sort of architecturally significant home. What you see behind me is painted 1970s paneling. It's white. It's a trick. Um, so space is interesting, but we're so affected by space, even if we don't know it. Like where you live, where you work, the the size of the window near your desk or your workspace, natural light. Humans flourish under natural light and wilt under synthetic light. So in a way, my work is seeking to bring light in. The experience of showing in a brightly lit gallery space like this with windows is different than showing in a cube design with no exterior light. The dramatic contrast between this space, which is Gallery 212 in DuPont, and this is like, this gallery is just a giant black box with white walls. And it could feel, this photo's a little dark. This is a photo from my iPhone. I'm not very proud of it, but I wanted to show you all this recent work. it is a backdrop for art. There are no other considerations. When you walk in the building from outside, you come through a glass door, and by the time you get into the series of gallery space, natural light is gone. And there's certainly reasons for that. I love our different museums in Washington. Um, Museums typically are not focusing on natural light because of preservation needs, but it is always important to know that, natural light provides the best render for your observation of nature or observation of art, and for painters, the best conditions to work in. So I sound like someone who spends all their time in like a dark box and doesn't ever get any sunlight. So that's not the case.
So to connect the real brief is,
Yeah.
I ask the question in extremes because I can be very, very stuck or very unstuck.
Yeah.
But but you're talking about space, which is where most of life is. Gray areas make more space.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I love space. I love, the details of like what's the floor made of? Why is the building like that? I think that older architecture tends to be more interesting. And I feel like there is this split in access to quality design in civic buildings or workspaces where not everybody gets the best. And so I love looking at modern buildings designed in the 60s and 70s that for their time were progressive. And the curious thing is now they're all out of date for the working methods of today. In DC, Washington, DC, we have very few industrial buildings. The buildings artists love are warehouses. There's not a lot of warehouses in DC. Where you all are in Montgomery County, and yeah, there's a warehouse district and there's access to larger spaces. But we don't have the same kind of like light-filled by the river studio spaces that you can find in Providence, Rhode Island, or in like little towns in New England where there's a river in every town. So you have to find those spaces elsewhere. I know so many artists in the DC and Maryland area where the ultimate goal is to build a studio in your house or backyard or something. And that's where you may have the ultimate control over the decision making, which can be great if you have those resources. And that's a long shot for a lot of artists. I'm like, if we had another hour, we'd talk about artist studio space and public funding for that and all that kind of stuff. We can do another talk on that sometime. I'm passionate about artist studio space, and I am always on the lookout for available studio space for other artists. So when somebody's looking, I want to be able to help guide them to something that's available, because space is so rare and also not necessarily affordable for everybody. And sometimes a good match between a group of artists who have an empty space, somebody's looking, it's always nice to make a match. There's like a studio matchmaking industry behind us somewhere.
Man, I have kind of a question about well, I mean, like the permanence of the medium. I imagine you have like kind of a lifespan before it becomes um, collecting dust or whatever that may be. Like if National Gallery came up to you and said, "We'd like to, add you to our permanent collection," like how would you
Yeah.
handle a situation like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is yes, the work is collectible. It's not necessarily my ultimate goal, but it's fine. I do have beeswax works in permanent collections. I have a solid beeswax work that's a three-dimensional shape in the U.S. State Department collection in the Embassy of Panama, and they have it displayed in a pedestal with a plexiglass cube over it, so it's protected from dust. I haven't seen it since 2005, so I don't know what condition it's in. If they ever invite me to the embassy in Panama, I will clean it for them. That's my deal. If somebody acquires one of my pieces, I'm like, I'm yours till I die or you destroy the piece or something. I will help with cleaning and repair for anything because it is such a unique material. Museums often have very limiting collections management protocols or collections policies, which don't allow materials that include soil or insects or insect casings or like anything that could possibly cause an infestation. So I don't know, every museum is a little different. Lots of museums have wax sculptures, encaustic paintings. The National Gallery has wax figures by a huge collection of wax models by Degas, the little dancer, the famous dancer. They have the wax model for her. Those are beeswax with lots of crap mixed in. So there's no limitation on beeswax in their collection. They probably want to make sure there's no pests when it arrives. Wolfgang Leib is a good example. The Phillips collection has the wax room. It's made out of beeswax. That's probably the same, kind of natural filtered beeswax that I use, but from his source. There's probably a thought process that the museum has to go through, and they have to create a collection management program for that particular work. They repair the wax room on a like daily, weekly, monthly basis, but that's inherent to the work. These works, if a museum acquired it, my recommendation would be display it for as long as you like and then put it away for a while and then display it again. And 3 months is a pretty good time window. It depends on what visitor traffic is like. So if you had, like, say you had like a curtain wall, like what's on the left side of the screen, and it went 100 feet and people were walking up and down it all day long and touching it and pulling on it and all that kind of stuff, and you just had to accept that, then maybe it's destroyed at the end of the installation. Or maybe we have an agreement to refabricate or supply replacement pieces when needed. That's all fine. It's all doable. I'm not going to teach somebody else how to make these. I don't think anybody else would want to do it. It's fine if this expires with my lifetime. If a museum's okay with that, I'm okay with them. And then the permanent stuff is like, this drawing on wood panel isn't going anywhere. And that's the kind of, someone earlier had asked about like, do you sell things? I don't sell a lot of beeswax installations. Actually, so far, zero. But people acquire works on paper, and that's great, and it helps, it helps pay for the beeswax, and studio expenses and stuff like that. I'm fortunate to have a job doing something else that is my full livelihood. And so there's a balance there. Like, if I decided I wanted to make sellable artworks, I might be making something very different. I don't want to make sellable artworks just for the sake of sellable artworks. It feels good when people like and want to care for my work. And just like every artist, you can't keep it all. There's no space. You can't keep it all. So let some of it go out, destroy some of it. I think we all should take out the trash. I do that by melting the beeswax down and making something else with it.
I kind of see this as the model of the Christo installations. You want to experience them while they're there.
Exactly. Yeah.
But, he
I want
raises
to,
money through the drawings and
yeah,
plans and everything else like that.
I never thought of Cristo, but yeah, you're totally right. And I didn't start making the drawings to raise money. It was just sort of a happy accident. And you know, for now, it's helpful. I also fund the production of my work through grants from different sources, primarily the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities. They offer an application opportunity for a yearly fellowship, which I've been fortunate to receive last year, year before, and for on and off pretty regularly as they've as they grant it, and then their art bank purchase program. So that's significant, and that's meaningful to me. It does tip the balance in me being able to afford to have a separate studio and all kinds of other associated things related to producing this work. So I'm grateful.
Thank you so much, Mary. We won't want to take up too much more of your weekend, but it's been an absolute joy to hear about your process and see your work and learn more about architecture in DC while we're at it too. Um, Come visit us at Glen Park and see actually Julia Bloom, who is part of Frick Gallery, or is the director of Frick Gallery. She's in our exhibition at the Art Clinic Online group show at Popcorn Gallery here at Glen. So you can see her work and Cory's work on display in about 12 minutes. But thank you again, Mary. This is fabulous.
Great. Well, thank you all. I really appreciate you giving me this time to talk and then asking curious questions. And I'm just now looking at the attendees. I didn't know who was here, but great to see you all. And I suppose this will be recorded online somewhere. We can all count the uhs and the likes afterwards.
People are thanking you and saying they're inspired by, especially by the beeswax, the rigidity versus solidity aspect of it. And I think that was it for, yes. And MAA was founded in 1954. Apparently, someone gave us that information. Thank you so much. We really thank MAA for sponsoring this, and Cory also for being there and introducing us to Mary. And hopefully she will be at the next ACO show.
Thank you
join
so
us,
much.
I hope.
And at some point, because my wife is a beekeeper, we will be doing our annual fundraiser for the Art Clinic Online by selling Tacoma Park by backyard bees honey.
That's
So
great.
Wow,
I picked up
wonderful.
the extractor yesterday and threw it in my car, and so at some point we'll get that delicious honey out to you guys.
Yes,
That's
Charge you
amazing.
more than you could ever imagine for honey, but it's a fundraiser for our program. So
right.
That's great.
And I think we've had a record for attendance, a recent record anyway. So many people joined us, many more than the average. Thank you to all.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, everyone.
thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
We'll see you.
Great
Oh,
work.
in
Thank you.
2 weeks, we have Gregory Fernand, who's hosted by Michael Janis. Gregory's a more traditional painter, but his work is a little, I don't know, it's incredibly intriguing and incredibly well crafted, and you just have to see it to believe it. So we're excited to see Michael Janis back with us again, and come see us at the park too. Thanks, everyone.